We'll give it a go. So my name is Paul Clemley. I'm a researcher with Robert Gordon University. I'm going to talk about how we facilitate, or we could perhaps facilitate, serendipity in the search user interface. So I'm doing a PhD. Overall research topic is looking at the causal factors for user satisfaction and search task performance in the enterprise. We've all had trouble finding something that we know exists, or gathering information, many different items, perhaps an open-ended question, then maybe do some analysis or decisions, only to find later that there's a really important piece of information that we missed. So we make our own attribution as to why that's happened. Quite often we blame technology or the search results. But there are probably deeper factors as well if you apply a systems thinking approach, looking at expectations driven by the internet. Google has about 1 billion users a week, uses up 0.01% of the world's electricity supply. Very difficult to apply those techniques inside organisations, but it drives some of our expectations. Search expertise, we again perhaps think everybody knows how to search and that we all have similar competency. I've just finished one study in an oil and gas exploration department, which has some rather surprising results, shall we say, on the search competency. It's probably for another day, that presentation. But feedback loops, how do people know if they're not searching very well? It's okay if you're looking for something that you know exists, but if you're gathering all the information to do with a particular basin, how do you really know that you found the most relevant for what you're looking at? Information governance, I mean, quality is key. If information is not there, then no matter what technology you use, you're not going to find it. And also attitudes of senior management. If people believe that finding information is effectively a technology problem to be solved, then how successful will they be? So I've been doing some research here, not just oil and gas, but also with defence, aerospace and pharmaceutical companies to look at whether some of these issues are transferable. And I'll be continuing over the next few years. So looking at today's topic is about facilitating serendipity. Now, I've never come across any evidence, certainly in feedback logs or interviews, where people complain that a search user interface is not serendipitous enough. But there may be an area to sort of stimulate, a latent need perhaps, where some search user interfaces may stimulate serendipity more so than others. And this is an area that I wanted to explore. So we know certain things from literature about serendipity favouring the prepared mind, information-rich environments, the happy accident where we fortuitously encounter information. This is a model from Macri and Blandford that indicates that to call something serendipitous, it has to be unexpected, insightful and valuable. So you can have something that's unexpected. If it's not valuable, it's not serendipitous. You can have something that's valuable. If it's not really unexpected, then it's not serendipitous. And there are some examples in the media of things being called serendipitous. For example, Walmart did a study and they found that during hurricane sales, the sales of Pop-Tarts rises by about a magnitude of 10. And that's called a serendipitous discovery. But if you look at it, they initiated a specific data mining project to look at what sales patterns were going on when a hurricane warning was issued. So it's again a subjective call whether to call something serendipitous or not. You also have a scale from slightly to very. So if you go to perhaps this conference today and over lunch, you bump into someone by accident whilst you're getting a coffee or eating, and you find out something really useful for your project. You could call that serendipitous, but then you did choose to come to an oil and gas conference. On the other hand, if you're shopping in a supermarket, you bump into somebody and you learn something useful for your oil and gas project, you may say that's more serendipitous. So there is a scale rather than just seeing it as a straightforward black and white process. So I've got some pebbles on a beach to sort of use as a bit of analogy to when we're looking for something, either that we know exists or we're trying to gather information on a topic. There's probably lots of results in our search results. There's information in there that could be valuable to us. They could be potential serendipitous opportunities. We did some work where the average number of words that we type into search engines in the oil and gas industry looks to be towards 2 words. On the internet it's 3 words. So we don't type a lot into search engines, and sometimes the corpus size of what we're searching is hundreds of thousands or millions. And there's one organisation I'm working with in the oil and gas industry that their enterprise search looks through about 65 million documents. So almost whatever you type, you're going to get a lot of results back. Hidden amongst there might be some really useful things, but it's sometimes difficult to see them in amongst all this sort of detritus that you get. So we know that a lot of search interfaces focus on precision, quite rightly so. If you're after a specific well proposal for a particular well, then you want to find that, not necessarily bothered with how many results you get back. But there is this feeling that a lot of search interfaces are constraining us in some way. On one hand, you've got people saying, for example, the internet is the greatest serendipity engine in the history of human culture. You have other people that feel that we're in a bit of filter bubble. Things are being filtered for us. A lot of the suggestions that we get from the likes of Amazon, or when you type in a search query, are based on crowdsourced data, historical, what people have done before. So this view that maybe we're being suggested things via the rear view mirror, things that are already being done. So there is a discourse, if you like, in discussing about the extent to which these new search tools, not necessarily new ones, are facilitating serendipity. I want to focus on faceted search as a way of browsing in the search interface what are in your search results. So faceted search is the faceted search you've probably seen if you've used Netflix or smart TVs or other search user interfaces, is where you see categories, typically on the left-hand side, that give you some idea of what's in your search results. The good thing with faceted search is that they only show you what's in your search results, so you never click on one of these and get no results, because it's driven by whatever you've typed and the search results. And this is an example from the search user interface in the Johnson Space Center in NASA, but very similar to our industry. And if you look at the knowledge organization and the structure that goes into these categories, it's very valuable. It's traditionally what libraries have done for tens or hundreds of years. And it's a good way to browse. Maybe we click on something that we wouldn't have otherwise made if we're just presented with a search box. But one of the challenges is, or should we say the premises, is that sometimes these rarely convey unusual concepts. So if I give you an example, we got a well proposal. It's a 50-page PDF about Prospect Blue. It contains some information on lacustine reservoirs. So someone goes in, makes a search on lacustine reservoirs, gets maybe hundreds, thousands of results. That document may contain something to do with lacustine reservoirs that none of the other search results contain. Yet you won't know that. It might be on page 45 or whatever in the search results, because it'll always be represented on this left-hand side by the tags that were representative of the document as a whole, typically Prospect Blue, document type, well proposal. So it may be that some of these are a little bit bland and don't perhaps suggest some intriguing things that may be buried within the search results. Now, one of the ways to contextually suggest these things is to use tag clouds that I'm sure you're all familiar with, where you can use them on documents or web pages. The size of the text is relational to how frequent that word is. And you can use them around the search term, so not just within the document as a whole, but in the context of the search. In some tools, this is one library system that a few governments have deployed. You probably can't read it here, but it's showing you some words that are around the search term that have been typed. And you can then go and click on one of these and it will filter your search results. But they have one thing in common, which is they always tend to show you, because you get a lot of data when you look at co-occurrence, text, co-location information, is they always show you the most frequent. And one of the initial research studies I did with 54 petroleum engineers, using the Society of Petroleum Engineers Connect discussion forum, is that people often found the most frequent were relevant but not interesting. So this is something that I wanted to explore. So just a little bit about word co-occurrence based on the distributional hypothesis from Harris. The words that appear close to each other share some form of meaning. So this is a piece of document text. It's actually from a paper published in the SPE from ExxonMobil about deployment of search and document management. And you can see the word metadata. Imagine we made a search on metadata. What co-occurrence techniques do is they go through the document, you find the word metadata, and it grabs out the words to the left and to the right. There are other ways of doing this, but this is called an n-gram type model. There are other more sophisticated forms of text co-occurrence. And then it continues down the document to the next occurrence of metadata. You notice it truncates here because the context is a sentence. That's why there's less words to the left and to the right. And you can see, if I just read this out, any capture of metadata that added more than about 10 seconds to saving a title was considered problematic. So this is about deployment of document management systems. And you can see there's already an association between problematic and metadata. So it continues and adds all these up to get a distribution. The problem is that these generate large amounts of data. So what do we decide to show in the search user interface to people? This is some possibilities. The yellow is the Society of Petroleum Engineers. So this is 70,000 of all of the articles in the SP, basically. The green is the Geological Society of London, so that includes the Lyell collection, all the petroleum geology journals. And this is for the query permeability. So it's showing you here the most common words that appear next to permeability within a certain window in the entire SPE. So you've got relative, reservoir porosity, low, etc. And then you see a slight difference. This is almost like the geoscientist's view of permeability. You can say this is the engineer's view of permeability. And some differences, you've got fault mentioned here, not mentioned here. A little bit more of a scale issue because fracture is mentioned here but not here. So you get these sort of differences color-coded by the type of term. So you don't need to go into all the colors, but the yellow ones are things like materials, rocks, stuff like that. The two on the right, exactly the same data set, except they're ranked by mutual information measure. And all mutual information measure does is it ranks by the frequency that the word co-occurs with permeability compared to how often that word co-occurs, how often that word occurs in the entire corpus. So what you tend to find is that this ranks words that only, whenever they appear, they almost always appear with permeability. And you see you get a lot more specific words. You've got Klinkenberg, hysteresis, pseudo-relative, macroporosity. So it generates much more specific types of words than these rather general ones. One of the downsides of these techniques is that you won't find a common word in an unusual context. They tend to be restricted to very specific words. So this is the sort of challenge, is trying to present what may be intriguing to the user. Now what's intriguing to one person or one geologist will not be intriguing to another. But it's possible that some algorithms are more likely to suggest intriguing filter suggestions than others, and ultimately trying to surface something that intrigues someone to go and drill down further. So this is a mock-up just to illustrate using the SPE 70,000 papers. We've got our usual search query, this time seismic, could have been anything. And then some secondary queries. So use Gulf of Mexico, Malaysia, Nigeria, Australia and Canada. I could have used geological time, I could have used depositional environment, I could have used anything. This just to illustrate the concept. So I wasn't going to be beaten on colours because a lot of the other presentation is very colourful. So still got the colours here. And what this is showing is for Gulf of Mexico, the key one is to look at this column, algorithm C. And what it's showing is it's using discriminatory word co-occurrence. So these words here only co-occur with seismic in Gulf of Mexico, but not seismic in Malaysia, seismic in Nigeria, seismic in Australia, or seismic in Canada. So it's giving you some sort of discriminatory pattern. Now either that's a real-world pattern, or it's a data artifact, but it's something that may intrigue someone to drill down further. And I'll come back to this in a moment. So the research aims, to what extent can some of these techniques stimulate serendipity? Why does this happen, and when might we find them useful within oil and gas exploration? So I signed agreements with the SPE, the Geological Society of London, and the American Geological Institute, so well over 100,000 articles. I then looked at some sample queries based on search logs and interviews, applied some Python scripts to spew out the semi-interactive visualizations to test with various organizations. They're color-coded using a controlled vocabulary, so where the words are recognized in a controlled vocabulary, we can color them. So it just breaks the display up, and the idea was to almost produce something that was like DNA-like in a display. If something is of interest to people, the interactive stimulants were linked. So magnetotellurics is down here. if that was something that someone found they wanted to explore more for Gulf of Mexico, then they could click on that, and then that would launch the results in whatever system it was for that association, and then they could drill down to read the context, either something they already knew or perhaps a new learning opportunity that was valuable. So here's to sort of bring to life two organisations. This one here, you use 64-inch touchscreens. So we had this, it's not quite Minority Report with Tom Cruise, for those who remember that, but they could lean forward and touch the terms that interested them. We tried groups from 2 to 6, thinking of information seeking is slightly more collaborative rather than thinking, searching is just one person in front of a screen, but more than one person. And then in this organisation they didn't have a touch screen available, so we used a large poster and then a tablet which they could use to drill down further. So these were video and audio recorded, these sessions with two different organisations. We purposely sampled different ones. This is a very large oil and gas operator. This is a small geoscience consultancy. Here predominantly geophysicists, here predominantly geologists. And then the analysis was both qualitative, mapping the themes that came out of the conversations, but we also gave questionnaires at the end of each focus group to converge. And this convergence coding matrix was a view where we could see themes that appeared in both organisations, or maybe a theme that existed in one but not the other, or a theme where there were two different conflicts about the theme. So it was bringing together the different methods and the results from the different organisations to feed some of our results. So here's some of the results. I'll read. I like this quote. This is for one of the chief geophysicists in the large oil and gas operator. It's like open up the box to me and I'll pick what does not fit with my brain, like one of those games. And what appeared to be happening was people have their own mental model for a topic, and what they're doing is they're scanning the lists for things that don't fit their model. And when they see something, that's what they're interested in. And there were some jokes that we had about, the need for an algorithm for the bizarre, because it seemed that subject matter experts are interested in the unusual, perhaps different from novices. In terms of some other areas, people are very interested in unique words. I won't go into it, but we also looked at sentiment terms, so things that had negative sentiment. Some of those attracted people's attention, and we captured one example of, well, more than one, but this is an example of where there was a serendipitous encounter for someone that was working on a project on carbonates. Some other things we found was personality differences. These two quotes perhaps sum up the end members, perhaps what you get with any new approach. So you've got one person saying, this is overwhelming, maybe too much information, and then you've got someone else saying, excitement was the first thought I had. So there's going to be a personality element to some of this, maybe a bit like Marmite perhaps, that some people will like these approaches and others will perhaps see them as not relevant to the type of work that they're doing. This theme here about maturity. One focus group, we had a discussion for 10 minutes before we even got to the stimulant, if you like, talking about search in an organisation. I think if people are struggling to find the most basic of information, then some of these techniques will be harder to introduce into the organisation. So there is an issue that the geoscience consultancy, we never really had this discussion. They seem to have a much better handle on finding their information within their own organisation, which is going to be easier for a smaller company anyway. But this is probably a factor. And then these were the themes that both organisations identified where they thought these techniques could fit somewhere within what they were doing. Competitor intelligence, people like the idea of using company names and then looking at different trends for different basins, for example. Idea generation, just instead of thinking that people come up with a hypothesis and then they use search systems to meet the need for their hypothesis, turning it around and using the search interface as a creativity enhancer to generate a hypothesis in the first place. So that was something that both organisations saw. Analogues was another one. One quote I recall It's difficult to search for analogues because you don't know what they are. So surfacing those, project framing at the beginning, when you go quite wide before narrowing down in a project, perhaps gathering up various documentation, perhaps after action reviews, previous operations reports and third-party reports, and maybe using that to stimulate the framing process as well as the usual techniques. And then finally, taxonomy development. Both organisations had done some taxonomy work, and there was some smiles, I think, as people were recognising words and terms that weren't in their taxonomy, that it could be used to check how good their taxonomy is. And I think someone said, wouldn't it be embarrassing if we came up with this taxonomy and the most frequent words to do with the topic was one that we didn't have. So that was perhaps I would see from a business value point of view one of the least impacting ones, but certainly relevant within the uses. This is the questionnaire that we used after each focus group. So here we've got, to what extent do current search interfaces facilitate serendipity in your enterprise? So this is not at all to a large extent on the right-hand side, and then number of participants. So you can see a bit of a spread. And then we asked, to what extent could these techniques facilitate serendipitous discovery within the user interface? And we moved to more of a 73% view. So based on this data, and it's limited, so it's a relatively small sample, it does appear that some search user interfaces, some techniques within them, are more likely to stimulate and generate those happy accidents than others. What I talked a little about earlier, very simple, one of the simple models where people have their view of the world, and we all have many different mental models for how information systems work and what we think we know. And you almost do spot the difference, this comparing with the stimulant, prompting views, and then where there is something that's intriguing for someone, if that turns out to be a genuine learning opportunity, then the mental model gets updated. So this is all in the public domain. It's published in various conferences, various journals last year. So some more companies have taken them up. This is one, Exploration New Ventures. Instead of using the third-party content, they used their own content. So about 20,000 documents on the shared drive. And a nice example where, not a eureka moment, but stimulating an idea that they hadn't thought of, which they've put back into their geological model. So in summary, not all user interfaces are equal. We need to apply the sort of Google-like technique so people can lay their hands on the URL for their tool, for the latest document on X, Y, and Z. But also we need to cater for other needs as well. There was some limitations with the stimulant. It was only semi-interactive. I had feedback from both organisations to go away and build a tool. It's not my research to build any software. So what I have been doing is talking to organisations, and certainly if there's anyone here who's interested, I'm more than happy to talk about it, is to build an interactive tool so people can type in their own terms and explore, and then we can gather some more research data as to how effective they are, as well as potentially adding some value to whatever organisation that is. And just finishing off, really last two slides, it doesn't need to be something that looks completely different. This is just a standard SharePoint search type interface. And you have your usual facets on the left, some of which are automated by things like logical format, whether it's PowerPoint or a Word document, but also categories which will link to what you've tagged the document with. And those can all help you filter your search results. But you could just add a little web part on there, for example, getting down to some practical areas, which you could link to some radio buttons. Some people, may be in the mood for this type of exploring. Other people may not. So you might want to have that option to hide it if it becomes distracting. But just rather these bland filtering options, is just use the data to generate some interesting topics. There's one award company, I tested a few search queries. Stuck a pipe was one, had 45,000 results. And it sort of occurred to me is how much there is around that term in those documents that probably a lot of drilling engineers would learn a lot from. Yet there's no suggestion or prompting of what's in their search results in most search user interfaces. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Any questions?
Go on.
Yeah, go.
It reminds me of my process. I write these straps on the cover, and I'm basically trying to say, here's some serendipitous thing that might be relevant to you, which you wouldn't expect. So I guess there's two observations. One is maybe your algorithm could write these better than I could. But another one is maybe a human journalist could write on an exploration paper, here's something interesting about this paper, which it's not something that people do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many. I mean, I used text co-occurrence as one method to generate serendipity. I mean, I think the editor of any newspaper or magazine or journal is a serendipitous agent in their own right, because you're putting things in front of people that they may not have otherwise looked at. So I think there are many ways to stimulate serendipitous discovery through office design, through to many different things. So yeah, I was just looking at one area, but there's so much data out there. It's just amazing, and it's growing. At least doubling every 2 years in terms of unstructured content. And I just think a lot of the search user interfaces that we have, are very similar to what we've had 10 years ago. So it's a case of leveraging this information, not just storing it in databases, but trying to squeeze, something interesting out of it.
Let me ask you a question then. One of the companies I'm an advisor to is looking for shale gas and shale oil in the US, which is a big activity. And when you ask companies like that, even for a small project area, one basin, and it's quite different from what we find in Europe, how much data they have. They will say, well, 15,000 well logs. No, 15,000 wells. So each of those have got half a dozen or more well logged in. I've got 25,000 fluid samples, and I've got somewhere 10,000 reports on cores and cutting. So first of all, disparate information, different types of information, and then held in all sorts of strange formats, and some of them in pictures, some of them in Word files, some of them in 25-year-old, state of canvas reports. I mean, could you organise searches on that using this technique?
Well, I mean, there are plenty of technologies out there that will index as well as unstructured content. They will index structured databases as well. So, I mean, a lot of that technology has been around for a while. I mean, one of the challenges is the more you integrate, the more results that you get. So, there's been some interesting conversations that I'm still evolving. The method is people want a one-stop shop for everything, but as they move towards it, some of the requirements then change because they then get so much back. But yes, the need to integrate those silos and reduce the amount of places that people need to look is absolutely something that's more likely to lead to people finding complete results. And that goes externally as well. I did one survey that indicated the most popular search tool for any geoscientist was Google. And in the proportion of all the other information-seeking activities, they spent 40% of their time. And it just sort of occurred to me, there's a lot of focus on internal tools. And of course they use mediators to help them search. So indirectly, they're using internal sources. But geoscientists spend a lot of time searching the internet and subscription services. So there's also a need to integrate the subscription-based services as well.
Because, I mean, one of the examples I'm thinking of, confronted with all this information, I mean, clearly somebody approached it with a mental model, and then, whoa, 2 years later or 3 years later, actually, stuff that was in this vast amount of data was revealed by somebody acquiring new data, but we could have known it all along if we'd known how to search it. I mean, presumably that's a problem that's not tracked.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, statistically speaking, it's more likely that as we search, we are missing these gems and serendipitous opportunities all the time than statistically is that we're not. And although there was a bit of disagreement, I mean, another area is things like after-action reviews or look-backs, because what would be great is to compare a shared mental model of the people in the review process with maybe what the operations reports, particularly in, say, shale gas areas where you've got, you know, thousands of operations reports and completions, etc., and mine that information to compare in terms of, you know, perhaps the things that are going wrong or the opportunities are different to what people think they are over a period of time. And these techniques are very simple. I mean, some of these tools, if you had a programmer that was pretty good, I think you'd better knock something out in about 5 to 10 days. I mean, they're not. You can get very sophisticated, and the other end of the spectrum would be the cognitive computing, you know, paradigm. But there are some really low-hanging fruit, very simple things to do that could add quite a bit of value.
Anybody else? Okay, thanks very much.